Yeah, so hi, my name is Chisom. I what am I? I am Nigerian, American, and Norwegian, and naturalized Norwegian. I am the founder of Diversify, and a DEI enthusiast. Lately, actually, along my DEI journey, I've been doing a lot more work around justice, and we're going to start introducing that next year. So really excited about it. I am Black. I'm going to describe myself now. I am a Black woman. I have twists that I did myself, so I'm feeling pretty proud. Takes way too long. And I am sitting in front of a boring wall as usual, wearing a something like a turtleneck off-white top. And yeah, happy to be here. Eva, you want to say something about yourself?
Yes, of course. It takes me always a little bit of time to unmute myself. So hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and share the screen again with Chisom, now in a different role. As she said, I'm usually a moderator, so I'm very happy to also present something to you. Hi to everyone I know and hi to everyone I don't know. My name is Iva. I'm program director at Diversify. I am originally from Croatia. Haven't been naturalized in Norway yet, so I'm not a Norwegian yet. Yes, I've been with Diversify for the past 3 years and contributed to most of the projects and programs and panel discussions and everything we do with Diversify. So let me also describe myself. So I have fair skin, white skin, light hair, pulled back. Behind me is like a glass wall with a little bit of yellow you can see on the wall. I have a shawl, which is a white, green, and black, and underneath a black blazer. I have brown eyes.
So it's an experience, right? Having to describe yourself to.
Yes, like it's always nice.
Yeah. Okay, so today I'm going to share my screen. Let's see how this works. 1 second. So if I present this and then if I come here. Right. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
It says Chisom has started screen sharing. Yes, we can see it now.
Fantastic. Okay. I'm just gonna set the picture right so I can see some of you. Okay. So yes, today we are talking about 4 practical tips to amplify DEI in 2023. So welcome. Eva and I have already described ourselves, so we're just going to show you our beautiful faces again and then move on to the next screen. The topic again, because we like to remind you in case you forget. And what we're going over today is we're going to very briefly describe DEI, as always, because it's always fair to start by saying this is what we're talking about. And today we thought we'd make it a little bit more spicy by giving some examples of what DEI is and what DEIB isn't. And then we're going to talk about the 4 tips. And then we're going to close. And in between, there are questions. And as usual, please, join the conversation, ask questions in chat, disagree with us. We love that. Okay. So Eva is going to start, and Eva is just going to tell me to say next and next and next, yeah?
Yes. Okay. So as Chisom said, we're going to start quickly to just define what DEIB is. Of course, it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but it's always nice to kind of again and again set the stage so we don't take for granted that we know what it is. There's always something new to learn about it. So diversity, what is diversity? Usually when we think of diversity, we think of people from different countries, people from different cultures. In Norway and in the Nordics, it's usually talked about as gender diversity. So how many women in leadership positions, how many women in certain sectors. And although that is important, that is not all that diversity is. Diversity has a lot of parameters. So here we've chosen to mention some of it. And as I said, it's gender, ethnic origin, nationality, age, race, disability, language, political opinions, religious beliefs, social background, sexual orientation, physical appearance, and many more. Next, Chisom. So what is equity? Equity is the fair treatment. So people, not all people have the same needs. So what equity does is provide people with what they need so they can access the same opportunities and advancement in the workplace or in the society, and at the same time striving to identify and eliminate those barriers that have prevented the full participation of the same group. Next one. So we come to inclusion. And diversity and inclusion very often are taken and used interchangeably. And it happens also in Norway quite often that diversity and inclusion, mangfold og inkludering. So if you have diversity, if you hire diverse talent, that means that you're inclusive. Well, that is not so. So diversity shows the makeout of your workforce or the society, while inclusion is the practice. It is a culture that enables the diverse talent or diverse people to thrive. So it is a practice that provides equitable access to the opportunities and resources to all people who might otherwise face exclusion and marginalization. And it actually focuses on valuing people as they are, and that in that process, empowering them to thrive. Next one, Chisom. And we come to belonging. So basically, when diversity and equity and inclusion are in place, we naturally come to belonging, to that feeling of security, of support, when you know that you're accepted, that you're included, and that you're seen and heard and valued for what you are. As we said, it's when individual can bring their authentic self to work. So, okay, that's me, Chisom.
Thanks, Eva. I also just want to mention here that oftentimes, especially in the Nordics, where there is a limitation on the basis of what you can measure, people say things to me like, you can only measure diversity, you can't measure equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I think it's important to clarify the difference between measuring diversity as a demographic information and measuring actually what happens in an organization where when you are equitable, when you're inclusive, and when people have a sense of belonging, because that also feeds into the diversity of the team and representation that happens across the team, just beyond the demographic information being like, who's a woman, who's a man, who's a non-binary person, you know, who's gay, who's straight, who's black, who's white, and everything else in between. So that's also worth just to mention in very quickly, because oftentimes I hear a lot of that. All right, so just a quick overview of why it's important. I think most of us know this. Sometimes I have to say, like, I find it quite frustrating to have to explain, you know, like in the workplace about how, what percent, like the data, you know, like it will make you more productive, will make you more this, more that. So I'm just like, oh, how about you just do it because it's the right thing to do and be a decent human being? But no, sometimes we have to do this. So what does DEIB in the workplace leads to? It leads to better decision making, increases it by 87%. It amplifies collaboration. Your employees are more engaged by 101% extra. That's a lot. Innovation does definitely improve. You grow, which is oftentimes what businesses are interested in. Like, how much money does this make me? Well, it makes you 2.3 times more cash. So something definitely good to pay attention to. And of course, you tend to increase your revenue as a whole. All right. So why is it important? I think we all know that it's important because, you know, we have to continually, I kind of like to say, like, as long as we're breathing and as long as we're evolving as people, DEI also continues to evolve because we have to continue to learn and continue to reflect. There are things that are changing all the time. For example, some of us here might have heard about BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, which is kind of like this catch-all phrase that we use to qualify, you know, everybody who's not white. And now there's a top leadership coming along where it's actually changing how you define people as BIPOC. So now we're actually trying to define people as people of the global majority, because in the global sphere, people who are white are actually a minority. So white people are people of the global minority, whereas everybody else are people of the global majority. So things are changing and you have to keep learning and reflecting and saying, like, what does this actually mean? And I've been reflecting on this actually for a while, because like in different spaces and in different contexts, like people call me a minority. Like in Norway, perhaps I'm a minority because yeah, there are more white people in Norway than saying Black people. But then I come from Nigeria and there are 200 million plus of us, and I'm a majority. So it's always interesting to think about, like, which context am I looking at myself from? DEI is also important because it equips us with the tools to engage with people from diverse backgrounds with empathy, tolerance, respect, which is very important. You know, sometimes you're talking to people and you're just nodding along and like everything they say makes sense. But have you ever imagined, like, what if you're in a room with somebody who you just want to like pull your head out because they have a completely different perspective, which in your point of view and in the context in which you exist, you think it's absolutely ridiculous. And you're just like, okay, God grants me serenity. Like, I need to keep calm. How do I do this? Right? So having these tools to actually like reflect and be like, yo, okay, I'm here to listen, not to respond. I want to listen and try to understand where they're coming from, because maybe there's something I can learn from them. And there's always something we can learn from people, even though sometimes that something is like, I never want to see you again, right? You still learn something. Okay. It also helps us develop self-awareness of our own perspectives, biases, and assumptions. And I think like when you continue to engage with DEIB, you start to catch yourself in the middle of a sentence that automatically excludes people. You know, yesterday I found myself, like, a friend of mine had sent me a message about something that was not cool. And I was about to type in, oh, that's so lame. And then I thought, oh no, I can't type that. That's ableist, right? But it's just like unpacking continuously the things that almost like we don't think about before we say, because they're so ingrained into like the language that we use. So I think for me personally, just engaging with this information has been really good, because I catch myself and I'm like, oh yeah, sorry, not about to say that. What is the right thing to say instead? Okay, so now we want to go through this little quick thing about like what diversity is and what diversity isn't. So what is diversity? Diversity is valuing people as they are, whether they come from traditional backgrounds, whether they're like a Nigerian American / Norwegian person like me, or they're, you know, like Iva, who's from Croatia. You know, how diversity of thoughts and experience. And I do want to nuance something about diversity of thoughts, because there's a lot of conversation now where it's like you can have the most homophobic, transphobic, racist view. You're just like, yeah, it's diversity of thought. I mean, there's a line. We always have to be mindful of that line. Like, I think you are entitled to sharing your thoughts. You're also entitled to the pushback that comes from sharing that thought. So try to be inclusive in the way you share that diverse thoughts, regardless. Diversity is about accepting people as they are. And this is always a tricky one, because sometimes, like when I'm sitting at the table with my difficult uncle who has the worst opinions, I'm just like, do I accept this person as they are? I'm not sure. Do I want to sit through this once a year? Maybe. But nonetheless, it's like awareness and acceptance of both similarities and differences among people. And I think just raising that awareness, nonetheless, makes you acknowledge that everybody is different. People are not the same. They might not have exactly the same points of view as you do. Diversity is about intersectionality and identities, recognizing that I'm just not one thing and you're not just one thing. You're not just three things. There are a lot of different things that compound to form the identity that you have now. A commitment to action, and it also increases representation towards in your organization across levels and positions. So diversity is you are committed to actually doing the work, not just talking about it and moving on, not just performative work, that you understand that this work takes time and it's not something you can just slap a band-aid or a plaster on and it's fixed. And diversity is also perspective change and innovation. So thinking about different ways and approaches to tackle problems. I normally say this to my mother. She doesn't always appreciate it, even though she made me exactly the way I am in terms of having my opinions. Sometimes my mom, it's like how way or no way. And I have to explain to my mother that 5 + 5 is 10. 8 + 2 is also 10. 9 + 1 is also 10. And she always finds it really annoying because she thinks I'm being sassy, which maybe I am being sassy, but it's also just explaining that there are different ways to get to the same point. And sometimes listening to somebody else's perspective or integrating somebody else's perspective is absolutely necessary. So what diversity isn't? So diversity is not homogeneous and binary gender equality. In the beginning, Eva talked about the homogeneity, and we just talk about gender equality, and that's just talking about men and women. And oftentimes, even within the conversations about gender equality, we only have representation of white women and white men. So we need to move beyond that homogeneity and also beyond the gender binary to include people along and within the full gender spectrum. So homogeneous teams is not what diversity is. It doesn't matter if you have 50% men and 50% women. If everyone went to NHH or BI or the same school and they have more or less similar backgrounds, it is still a homogeneous teams. Diversity is in limited ways of thinking. Diversity is not just about quotas, because oftentimes people are just like, oh, okay, so I just employ 10% more disabled people and then we're good. No, you're not good. That's not enough. Diversity is not about being passive or not taking action. Diversity is not culture fit. Diversity is culture contribution or culture add. Culture fit is when you get in a situation where you start to hire people who are similar to the people already in the company, or when your friends, so if we also bring this back to the individuals, where your friends look like you, act like you, have similar experiences and backgrounds as you, that's a culture fit. Diversity is more about culture contribution. So yes, you're different, but what can you add to my life, to the workplace? And of course, diversity is not reactionary or performative DEIB initiative. What that means is, oh my gosh, it's June. We've not done anything for Pride. Let's try to do something very quickly, fly the Pride flag. Or say it's Women's Month. Oh, now let's try to do something for Women's Month just to show that we care. It's more about what you do during those months, but also what you do the rest of the year as well. and how intentional you are in integrating it into your workplace practices. So I'm going to move on to equity. Equity is fair, equity is impartial, equity is access to equitable opportunities that lead to similar outcomes. Equity is very different from equality. Equality is giving people exactly the same thing, the same access, right? And oftentimes we've been programmed to think that equality is fair, but equality is actually not fair. Because if you give me and somebody who's blind the same computer to work on, I will do better than them because the computers they are working with is not meant for them. Equity is giving them computers that have screen readers and things that they need, and then giving us the same opportunity to actually have the same outcome in the projects that we're working on. Equity is also about tailor-made approach by the individual. Like I said, you're not going to give a grown person the same bicycle that you would give to a child because that child would not be able to drive that bicycle because it's just too big for them. So equity is like, okay, I want to give you both bicycles. I'm going to give you a baby bicycle and I'm going to give you a grown person bicycle. Equity requires nuance, understanding that proximity is not lived experience. So nuance is important. The fact that, you know, my sister and I have had similar upbringing, similar background, gone to similar schools, and up until like the past 10 years ago, like past 10 years or so, we basically lived our lives like twins. Was still different in the way we see the world. We still have different perspectives, was still different in the way we even address challenges in our lives. So nuance is important. So the fact that you have a gay friend doesn't mean that they speak for all the other gay people in the world, right? Understanding that proximity is not lived experience. Your closeness to something, your closeness to women, understanding a woman's like women's challenges in the workplace does not necessarily mean you can understand and speak for all other women. Equity is also pay equity, paying people what they are worth. It's gender equity, giving access to all genders what is equitable. Equity is also opportunity, providing people with the opportunities that they actually need to thrive. So what equity isn't, equity is not equality because equality is same treatment and same treatment does not work because people get left behind. Equity is not favoritism or partial development and opportunities. Sometimes you have a favorite person who you feel like in the workplace, they just get you, you know, like they're very similar. So they're the ones who get invited out. They're the ones who get the first pick in projects, for example. That is not equity. Equity is providing equitable access to resources. Equity is also not variable pay or performance-linked pay because sometimes it's like, oh, who's the biggest hustler? Who's bringing money into the company? That's the person that we get paid more. But if your job is not client-facing, if your job is not about sales, that means that you miss out on a lot of promotions and opportunities for increased pay because you're not bringing in additional, you know, hard currency, whereas you might be contributing to facilitate the growth of that company. Equity is not lack of transparency. Oftentimes there's this like hush-hush culture in like workplaces where within teams, like of course, like when you have a big company, you can't know everything that's happening, but within your team, there's a level of transparency that is absolutely necessary for you to feel included. And if you feel like you're just working in a silo and you're feeling isolated, then definitely that is not equity. Equity is also not poorly developed decision-making criteria. There are a lot of people who like make hiring decisions based on my gut just tells me so. Well, hello, your gut is full of unconscious bias, right? So you need to have like a strategic and developed ways to actually make your decisions. Allegiance to the status quo. We've always done it this way. There's a quote somewhere, maybe at an airport. It's like the most dangerous word in the English language is we've always done it this way. That's like sticking to the status quo. That is not a good thing. that is not equitable. The fact that something has, the fact that, like, there's also another thing to say, like, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Actually, if it's not broken, can you improve it? That's another way to think about it. Yeah. And equity is not micro inequity. So micro inequities basically deals with ways in which individuals might be singled out, overlooked, ignored, or otherwise discounted based on unchangeable characteristics, such as race or gender. So microequities, you can also think about it from the perspective of, you can think about it from the perspective of, imagine being new in a workplace, and a lot of people in the workplace have been there for at least 5 years or 10 years, and they have their codes and they have the ways in which they talk, they have their in-jokes, and you're just like, yeah, how the heck am I going to break into this club, right? And then people get treated different, or you get treated differently because you don't belong into that club, right? So they're often subtle. And oftentimes they're unconscious. People don't intentionally try to facilitate micro inequities. And I think each and every one of us, at some point in our life, we've been in a room where we're having a conversation and people give a look and you're just like, what just happened? You know, like, why? Or you've also given a look. You know, I catch myself these days where I'm just like, I look at my friend and I give the eye like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, is this nice? What if that person notices what I'm actually doing right now? Right? So they are often conveyed through facial expressions, gestures, tone of voice, choice of words, nuance, and syntax. And I think it's quite interesting to also look at how we practice this in our daily life, like trying to watch, like, when I'm pissed, what type of tone of voice do I use? How does my face, because I often say, like, I have a face that betrays me. So even if I'm trying to, like, you know, smile, my face is just like, you know, like, it betrays me all the time. So just like trying to be mindful of my face needs to agree with what I'm saying, because when it doesn't agree, you can see. So just be mindful of how other people might receive that experience could also facilitate micro inequities. And I think that you also have to think about the role you have. For me as an employer, I'm also very mindful about how I respond to each of my teammates, you know, and, you know, am I more harsh with one person and not to the other person? And sometimes I am, you know, and it's something I try to, like, pay attention to is, like, why does that person get spoken to, like, very nicely and in a way that's very understanding, and I'm a bit more tough with somebody else? Okay, so what is inclusion? Inclusion is self-awareness, inclusion is empathy, inclusion is grace. I have a special relationship with the word grace. My daughter's name is Amara, and it means grace. So it's like one of my favorite words. Anyways, inclusion is circumspect. What circumspect means is that you are careful to consider all the different sides. Like, you're not arrogant enough to think that only your perspective is valid. So to be circumspect is you're very careful and, you know, critical about, like, okay, this is one perspective. Have I considered every possible perspective that I know of? And have I included other people? Have I included other people's perspective to also see if there's something I've missed? Inclusion is being friendly and being able to collaborate with people. And I think that, especially with friendliness and, you know, like, smiling and being happy is something that I struggle with, because sometimes I find myself, like, in professional meetings, and this is something that I need to unlearn. In professional meetings, I'm very much like, yeah, so tell me about that. Okay, so I'm very serious. And sometimes I reflect on myself and how other people are experiencing me, and I'm just like, Chisom, you're so, like, you look and you're acting so unapproachable, you know, and normally you're fun and goofy. I think I'm fun and goofy, you know. So sometimes I wonder, like, how do people experience me when I'm, like, all about business? And am I being as friendly and open as I could be? So it's something I think about quite a lot, because sometimes I experience myself in meetings and I'm just like, this is not what I want to put forward. So something I need to unlearn. Inclusion is psychological safety and freedom of expression. I think it's important to also note, I think for those who have seen or followed, the way we think about DEI for a while, psychological safety is a buzzword that people toss around. Like, it's just like, oh, we want to build psychological safety, and trying to figure out, what does that actually mean, building psychological safety? Because it takes work, and psychological safety is something different from each person, for each person, which is where equity comes into play. And another thing I want to mention here is oftentimes another buzzword is safe spaces. Like, we want to create a safe space. And it's important to note that it's difficult to create safe spaces. We can, however, create safer spaces, and it has to be a process of co-creation. I can't just walk into this virtual room, and it's like, all right, ladies, gents, and people, let's create a safe space. No, we have to co-create it through trust and communication. Inclusion is about collaborative conflict resolution. It's understanding context. Context is everything. And I think in this day and time, we see like a short video, or we see a short text, and we see things without the whole picture, and we make up our mind about like who this person is, what they are, what they're trying to say. And oftentimes we might even cancel them, but we don't understand their context. So I think like just learning to lead from grace and go like, okay, what is the full story? And now I'm being very mindful about being too quick to share something that triggers me, because I'm just like, what is the full story here? It's just the 1 minute clip that quantifies an entire existence. Like, do I have the full story? Do I understand the context? Context matters. Inclusion is about open and honest communication, even when that communication is difficult. It's about transparency. And it's about crediting others for the work done. I mean, I see so many practitioners, so many leaders take credit for work that is not theirs. It doesn't hurt to say, yeah, if I also worked on this with me, even if I was a big part of it, I want to recognize like Iva's work. So crediting others for the work they did, even if they printed the paper that you wrote on, I think is also quite relevant. Okay, so inclusion is not silos and isolation. Inclusion is not about tokenism. Like, oh, okay, we need one Indian person. So Shantani, hey, let's take a picture of you and show how inclusive we are to Indians. Inclusion is not being microaggressive or even macroaggressive. Inclusion is not indexing. I have a cold, so I have to breathe now. Give me a second, please. Okay, inclusion is not indexing. So, no, I need a second. Sorry, guys and people. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, had to blow my nose. All right. Inclusion is not indexing. So indexing is basically like using benchmarks as indicators to measure people. So for example, if you say, we want to index based on how friendly people are in the workplace. For people who are neurodiverse, who are not friendly in the ways that neurotypical people are, you're not going to give them a fair chance to actually say, like, how are you friendly? How does this work in your life? How does this work in your culture? If we even remove it from like neurodiversity and inclusion, we also have to recognize that we have different cultures. So in some culture, when you do this, you're waving bye. And in other cultures, you're saying hello. right? So thinking about, all right, what does this mean? And can we really use one thing to judge a whole bunch of people? Inclusion is not being colorblind. Please see my color and other people's color and celebrate it, right? Inclusion is about being accountable. You know, you can't, I hope my husband is not on this call watching, but when we talk about like accountability, he's there. Okay, great. When we talk about accountability, I find it really interesting, like just the clash of cultures between like at least my husband's Norwegian culture and my, say, Nigerian and American culture, where I could walk past a plate in the kitchen, and if I hit it and it falls on the floor, I'm like, oh, shoot, I broke the plate. And my husband would say, oh, shoot, the plate was in the way. And it always drives me crazy because I think you broke the plate. The plate was not in the way, even though it was in the way, you know, like you could have walked around it. So it's like, how do you take accountability in the work that you do? Inclusion is not lack of adoption. So it's really useful in the workplace if somebody, you know, to use, say, pronouns, for example, if you're encouraged to use pronouns to make other people who do not fit within the binary feel more seen and heard, it's really good to adopt it where you can. Inclusion is about empowerment, and inclusion is definitely not having clubs, you know, for the cool people, for the boys, for the older people. Inclusion is being as inclusive as possible. And then the last one is, what is belonging? Belonging is feeling valued and empowered to thrive. It's feeling like you belong to something, that you're part of something, that if you don't show up in the workplace, that somebody will notice and somebody will check in. Feeling like you belong is authenticity, is that you can show up as you are and you don't have to code switch. You don't have to change to fit in. Belonging is acceptance, is feeling that people trust and respect you. It's having that sense of security, the same like you have in, say, like a safe family. Belonging is honoring and recognizing unique contributions where we feel like we're honored and we're also honoring others. And of course, belonging is feeling that feeling of collaboration. So what belonging isn't about exclusion. Belonging is not hiding oneself. And there's so many of us who have to hide who we are, who cannot really show up 100%. And that is not what belonging looks like. And the way I like to think about this, you can't have, you know, like 50% inclusion. There's no such thing. Like, you have to feel 100% included in things. Like, oh, I feel included in some ways, and in other ways, I don't feel included. It means you don't feel included. And the same way with belonging. If you don't feel like you're able to speak up and express your beliefs, you know, then you can speak up and express your beliefs. There's no two ways about it, right? Belonging is not a culture of repercussions. There are some workplaces, some homes, some friendships where, God forbid, you speak your mind, because you're going to be paying for that forever, right? Like, it's going to be held against you. So if you really want to create a workplace that is where people belong and feel included, you know, you cannot say, okay, Eva said that one thing and that takes over everything, every other good thing Eva has ever said, you know? So it's like, okay, if there's something that is not clear, can we talk about it and move on? And I cannot continue to punish Eva for something over and over again based on she came as her true self and said what she felt, even though I agree, even whether or not, irrespective of whether I agree or not. Belonging is not self-editing. So we all know what editing is. For example, if you're editing a document, removing parts of it to make it sound better. When it comes to the self, unless you're genuinely thinking like, you know what, I eat too much sugar, I want to cut sugar out, or I drink too much wine, let me stop that, or something like the things you choose to do for yourself. But not that there's anything wrong with eating sugar or wine. I love wine, just to put that out there. And sometimes it's like, is there any, no, let me not encourage drinking. Okay, let's move on to self-editing. Don't edit yourself. And if you feel like you have to edit yourself to fit into a group, then you do not belong to that group, because belonging is coming as you are. And I think in life, normally we have to code switch. I code switch all the time when I'm with my team, when I'm with a group of Black women, when I'm at home, when I'm sitting at a table with like uncles I don't necessarily always approve of. There's always some level of code switching. But that is feeling in some sense, that I don't belong fully within my team. For example, I get to code switch into somebody who can just be herself. I don't have to be anybody else. And that's why I feel like my full self. But then outside of that room, I code switch to like, all right, the Chisom who is like super professional, or the Chisom who is this, or the Chisom who is that. So that I often think about it, like, am I showing up fully today? Am I showing up as myself? And what makes me feel like I can't? Okay. So what can you do? In general, practice the use of inclusive language, continuously assess how exclusive you are, practice micro affirmations, and use a diversity calendar. So that's what we're going to talk about next. And I think Eva is going to start us off with the first tip we have for you for 2023, using inclusive language.
Yes, and we're going to go through the communication and recruitment. So Chisom, we can go to the next slide.
Sorry.
It's going further. Yes, so what is inclusive language? And Chisom already mentioned some of the ways we can use inclusive language and be more inclusive in the way we talk. But just to kind of say what it is, it's a language that avoids biases, words, slang, jargons, phrases, any expressions that can discriminate or can exclude certain groups based on any of the diversity parameters that we mentioned today, or any other like race, ethnicity, disability, religion, sexual or gender identity, etc. Inclusive language and being inclusive through what we say and thinking what we say is vital in helping people who have been historically marginalized and underrepresented to feel included. Next one, Chisom. Next slide. Okay, so what is also important with inclusive language is that in its essence, it's intentional. You have to decide that you are going to learn about inclusive language and that you are going to use inclusive language. Because what happens is most people do not use exclusive language on purpose. And as Chisom also mentioned, that exclusive terms, exclusive expressions and words have become so normalized and ingrained in our language that we just use them without even being aware that we are being hurtful, exclusive, or harmful to anyone. The biases implicit in exclusive language are very subtle and usually non-deliberate. That's why it is so important that we are intentional in using inclusive language. And of course, the next slide, Chisom. And of course, we're going to share with you some example of exclusive language. But before we do that, do you know any examples of exclusive language to share with us? We would like to see it in the chat. Please, there's no judgment, there's no Dynamic. Okay, Emma said dynamic.
Driven. Driven is a very masculine, appealing word, for example. Whereas like passionate is more gender neutral.
That's right. Theologos, I hope I'm saying your name right, said, I spoke as a retarded person. Yes, yes, that's right, Kevin. You're on a roll.
We pose the service, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, yes. Men and women. Welcome, men and women. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
Cross a man.
Cross a
Huh? But yes, and it is funny, but it is something that we use. That's right, mankind.
Yeah.
Yes,
right.
Throw like a girl. And it's usually used like throw like a girl, especially to for a boy to tell him that he's not a man enough. Oh, okay. So we're really on a roll. We can go further. Chisom, can we have another slide? Yes. So these are examples of exclusive language that we want to share with you today. So, for example, when talking to a woman colleague, just calling her partner, boyfriend, or husband, just assuming that a woman's partner is always male, totally not thinking that it can be any other gender. When talking about family, only using mother and father, which excludes family structures that have same-sex parents, or taking into account that grandparents can also be caregivers. And one, which is good for this time, saying Happy Christmas to everyone in the office, where there are actually people from different traditions and religions in the room. And here you can actually say Happy Holidays. And I have to say that this year is the first time when I mostly hear people saying Happy Holidays. So I think we're going in a right direction here.
Just wanted to mention, Eva, that although I think when we talk, we say workplace, this is applicable just in general as well, like in your daily life interactions with friends and people. And this is to Emma's question here. Okay.
So we're talking, yes, Emma, we're talking in general. I mean, this is D&I in the workplace, so we tend to use more of a workplace kind of context, but basically it is general. You can talk to a woman anywhere and just assume and call her partner boyfriend or husband.
Right.
So,
and if I could add something here about workplace, like I had an epiphany about this. I hope I'm the one who had the epiphany and I didn't hear it from somebody else, but I think I had the epiphany like about a year ago where, one of my colleagues had said to me, I think we're talking about something maybe about like some form of discrimination. And I was talking about something that had happened to me at an airport. And she was like, yeah, but Chisom, can we talk about it within the workplace? We can't talk about it at the airport. And I'm just like, but the airport is somebody's workplace though. Like the restaurant is somebody's workplace. The tram is somebody's workplace. So if we think about it, like workplaces are not just limited to our workplace, but every space that we interact with, because somebody works there in some sense. And I think these are also quite valid ways to think about the workplace as a broader term and context than just like my office or your office space.
That's right. And I just want to refer to Joanna's comment that still mostly guyul in Norwegian, that it is a great thing about English language that it has this broadness. And I think this awareness of these issues is much older than in Norwegian. So yes, in Norwegian, I'm not even sure if you can say happy holidays and
Well,
how that
am I saying you doesn't mean Christmas?
Jul.
So you is probably just holiday, right? Is that right, Emma?
That's Christmas.
We're
I
learning
think.
Norwegian here. So for the
Yes.
non-Norwegian speakers in the room, sorry if we're excluding you temporarily. We're going straight back into this. All right, Iva.
Okay. We will back, but thank you for all the comments and everything. This is really great. We can go further. We would also like to there are many more exclusive terms to avoid, and some of them you mentioned in the comments. So we would also like to mention like handicapped when referring to a person with disability, or even when you're referring to somebody's not being as you expect them to be. Saying words like girls or boys when you're actually talking about women or men, or talking to women or men. Using the word guys, like hey guys, when you are talking to a mixed group of mixed gender group. Using term both genders in a sense like both. I know I did it recently. We were writing for some project and we wanted to say that, you know, we didn't want to say that this project is directed, like we were talking about the target group, and I mentioned both genders, and Chisom mentioned it and said like, let's not exclude people beyond the binary gender. A word like lame, Chisom also mentioned it when talking about something uncool. You can just say this is uncool. And using terms like blind spot or turn a blind eye, it's also very ingrained in English language, and it just comes up, and it's so normal to say that. But it's ableist, actually, just like lame.
I also wanted to add here that I often cringe when like somebody says, hey girls, unless it's another woman that says like, comes into a room and say, hey girls, how are you? But anybody else, like basically any other gender, I'm just like, don't do that, which is interesting as well to unpack. Like we excuse, like at least for me, I'm like, it's okay for women, you know, to say hey girls to me, but like especially if a man says hey girl, I'm just like, I'm not a girl. You know, like, whereas I would walk into a room to a bunch of women and say, hey, ladies, or hey, girls, and that's totally cool. But if a man did the same, like I would be like, oh gosh, no, don't do that. And I think as well, guys, is we also have to think about it from a context. Like if you're in the right context and with a group of friends who you know, I think this is why context matters. I think like, hey, guys, is not always, you know, a negative expression, but you need to know where you are and the context in which you're using those words. So be mindful not to walk into a meeting or a presentation and go like, hey guys, you know, but sometimes I walk into like a girlfriend hangout. I'm like, hey guys, how's it going? And in that setting is okay. So I think like context matters as well.
That's right. But I have to say that I do notice, so wait, Chisom, I'm still on this one. I do notice when women say girls, and I don't always like it. I know what you mean. I wouldn't cringe as much to it as when men say it, but also like I think women also internalize this, like girls, you know, it doesn't come from, if it doesn't come, it's not always, but if it doesn't come from that place, like, okay, I'm calling you girls or I'm calling you guys, but you know, I'm very aware what I'm doing. Yeah.
I think this is where like personal experiences or like personal context also matters. But yes,
Absolutely.
I think.
Yeah, okay, so we're at the next slide, and before we give you our examples of inclusive language, can you give us some example of inclusive language that you know? And please share it in the chat.
Hey people is one I'm using just to include everybody. But I often find myself saying like ladies, gents, and people. Yeah.
Hi team. Mila does that too. One of our teammates. She also always says hi team. And Nikki.
Folks. Hey folks, is good. Okay, I think we have to move ahead for time.
Yes. So how to actually promote inclusive language at your workplace. We're starting with using personal pronouns, and recommend everyone at your workplace to use personal pronouns in their email signature. I remember last year, Chisom recommended us in the team to use the pronouns in our email signature and on our LinkedIn. But here it's always it's also quite nice to say that you cannot actually force people to do it, because I remember, as far as I'm concerned, for me, it was not so comfortable to do it immediately. And we talked about it because I just felt uncomfortable. I didn't know enough about it. And after a while, after we talked about it, after I read about the pronouns and why is it important, what it means, I felt comfortable to put it in an email signature and on LinkedIn. So yeah, that's a really good way to actually also learn about it. And of course, when in doubt, ask employees their preferred pronouns. Of course, always be clear that they don't have to share wherever they don't want to share.
Right.
Huh? Chisom, you want to add something?
No, I just said right.
Yeah. So then use neutral words related to gender, sexual orientation, and other distinguishing qualities. We've already mentioned everyone, you guys. Somebody also wrote mankind. You can use humankind. Instead of men, you can use human. So this is something that, especially in English, it's quite important that you are aware and intentional about and learn about it. So this, what we are saying here, it's not all that there is. We also want to encourage you, dig more, learn more. Next, use gender neutral labels for family members. So instead of mother, father, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, use parent, spouse, partner, child. Like, for instance, you know, when I talk to Chisom and I talk about her husband, I'm going to say husband, but we know each other well enough. And I know that that is okay in our relationship. Otherwise, it's really good to say partner. Be mindful of medical condition and ableist terms. We've already mentioned turn a blind eye, tone deaf. You can use like, I don't want to notice this, or I can't hear. Also, the word crazy. We use the word crazy so much. And there are so many other words that we can use for situations like ridiculous or unbelievable or outrageous. We really don't need to use crazy. And the same is for lame, of course.
I think as well, like this is also where nuance matters, because there's a word hectic, which I use hectic for everything. I use hectic when something is super stressful. I use hectic when something is super fun. Like I could have gone to the best conference or like what's the thing where people sing concerts, you know, and I could come back and be like, oh, that was so hectic, it was amazing. So I think context matters. And of course, like crazy is not necessarily a nice term, but I've also heard people use crazy to mean amazing. You know, like, oh my gosh, it was so crazy, to mean like it was great. So contexts, yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, but I think also in some sense, I think just being aware how you use it is also very, very important. So listen to others when they share words or phrases they find harmful. In a sense, you don't need to get defensive. Like, if you don't intend to harm someone, that doesn't mean that you didn't harm someone. The impact matters, first of all. So just listen, apologize, and correct. Second of all, you will learn something. So stay open to that. Although it can be uncomfortable, although your first automatic reaction could be like to defend yourself, it really doesn't matter. The people are telling you that something was harmful for them. So listen to them. And
if I could add, like, this is where we also talk about proximity being different from lived experience, because the fact that you think, oh, this word is not harmful to me or is not harmful to my friend, doesn't mean it's not harmful to me. So just something to keep in mind.
Yes, and the same thing is not going to be harmful to one person and all people. So yeah. Create an inclusive language guide. So this is also a good thing, especially for companies. You can make a list of words and phrases that you want your team to use or avoid, or both. And this is a very good guideline for people, and to learn. Okay, so next one is also quite important, that many people have personal preferences, especially when it comes to identity. For instance, person first language, as opposed to identity first language. And in the first instance, you would say person with disability, person with autism. In the second, disabled person, autistic person. So some people think that it can be dehumanizing when we use disability or a condition first, and that it just kind of makes it part of their identity, like that's all that they are. While people who decide that they want identity first language actually think that it's inherent in their identity, and it can actually evoke a sense of pride. So it's quite important that you listen to what people choose that they want to be used. I've noticed lately there's been more and more usage of person with disability, person with autism, so person first language. But there are still people who want the identity first language. So yeah, ask and listen.
And this is not just limited to, I think, disability. I think a while ago there was a thing going around about like people saying they are a woman, right? And some people were like they were a Asian woman or a trans woman or a Black woman. And then there was this whole conversation about like, yeah, but we're all women. And it's like, no, yes, we're all women, but no, I don't experience the world as just a woman. I experience the world as, say, like a trans woman or an Asian woman or a Black woman or an Indigenous woman, and we have to listen to that. Like, I think oftentimes we tend to impose our worldview onto other people. If somebody says like they have imposter syndrome, and because you've never dealt with imposter syndrome, you're just like, just get over it. Stop thinking about it. It's like, that is not the way. That is not the place to go. Is giving people agency to self-identify, because that matters to them and to their lived experience. That also matters a lot.
Okay, so also a reminder, like it is a constant process of learning, unlearning, relearning, and no one gets it perfectly 100% of the time. So keep that in mind. Don't be hard on yourself, and be open, because it's important to admit when you made a mistake, when you make a mistake, and make the correction. Also, constantly and intentionally work on communicating more inclusively. So now I think, yes, Chisom is taking over the recruitment.
I'm going to go through this quite quickly. So inclusive communication is the biggest chunk of like the tip, and then we go through the other three quite quickly. Part of inclusive communication, we also have to think about recruitment. When we're recruiting people, a lot of job ads, I've seen so many job ads that says like men and women are welcome to apply. Does that mean everybody else shouldn't apply? And oftentimes words like this are not intentional, you know, like using words that are more masculine, for example, as opposed to words that are gender neutral. So inclusive recruitment is the process of connecting with, interviewing, and hiring a diverse set of individuals through understanding and valuing different backgrounds and opinions, and also being aware of how we communicate to reach them. I often say like the work of recruitment really starts from the job ad. Like how inclusive is it? How inviting is it? So in order to practice conscious and intentional recruitment, the only way to actually diversify your team is to hire diverse talents. You need to hire for cultural add and cultural contribution rather than culture fits. When you're conscious about recruitment, you will also intentionally move away from homogeneity in your workplace or hiring people who are similar. And it also means that when you are conscious, you have measures and processes to attract, assess, hire, and retain diverse candidates. Oftentimes, companies tend to think that once they hire you, they've done the work. No. The work begins, you know, they have to actually do the work of retaining you, of keeping you, even up to exits. Like when you move on to another gig because it's a better opportunity, more pay, whatever it is, or you're moving countries, even how you exit that company matters. Okay, so what can you do? It's always important to be aware of our unconscious biases. What's it called? Dr. Purnima says, if you have a brain, then you have bias. You have a bias, which is absolutely true. If you're human and you're breathing, you have a bias. No matter how woke or like engaged in the conversation you are, the only difference is you might catch yourself having that bias, like, oops, why did I say that? Okay, so bias is a prejudice in favor of one thing over the other, and bias is not always unfair. Actually, oftentimes it's considered unfair, but it can be beneficial to one group over the other. So we know conscious bias are the things that we know of. I have a very conscious bias over like pickled egg. I don't understand it. And sorry for anybody here who does, right? And then unconscious bias are things that we might not be fully aware of, right? In that case, this is why you're unconscious. So we're not going to go all through the bias, just going to mention a couple. So things like confirmation bias, name bias, we know is pervasive within like recruitment. If your name is Muhammad or Mad, you know, you might not get even called, your CV might not be read. You know, affinity bias, things like halo effect, conformity bias, we want to fit in, so we act like everybody else just to keep the peace and just to feel integrated within the society, our friends group, the workplace. Perception bias also matters. So we're not going to go over this. If you attended our last session on before the last session on microaggressions, we went in depth into all the different types of biases, but just going to quickly talk about 4 that are relevant within recruitment. Affinity bias, when you feel connection to those similar to us. So somebody walks into the room and, you know, they have a Nigerian background and I'm like, oh, okay, I like this, you're cool. And they have different or like similar education. You know, something that I could also like attach myself to. There was a time, and now I still have to teach myself to like unlearn it. I have, like I have a lot of degrees, and every time somebody walks into a room who has like similar amount of degrees or PhD, I'm just like, oh my gosh, they have to be smart, and I have that bias, and I have to like unpack that bias for myself. Perception bias, are stereotypes and assumptions about different groups of people. So like if you see a Sikh person, somebody who's from the Sikh religion, what do you think about them? If you see someone who's Muslim, what do you think about them? If you see somebody who is from a different group, somebody who's trans, what is your impression of them? Halo bias, projecting positive qualities onto people without actually knowing them. This is also quite similar where it's like, you see somebody who went to Harvard and you're just like, oh my gosh, that's great. I mean, are they really that great? Right? Confirmation bias, looking to confirm our opinions and pre-existing ideas. So like the first thing you think about something, you hold on to that. And even when you get different information, you're just like, no, but that first thing, my gut feeling is telling me that this is right. So just like quick things to pay attention to in terms of like continuously and consciously work to unpack the unconscious biases that you might have. And I think there is power in naming things and knowing what type of bias you are exhibiting. Of course, like these are all a lot of words, but just being mindful about like, oh, what type of emotions did that evoke, and why do I think this person is better than that person? All right. So what can you do? Just a roundup here. Inclusive job interview process. Make sure that people are having standardized-ish questions. Use diverse interview panels. Make sure that you have different people in the interview panels because they might see something that somebody who's similar to them misses. Where possible, use recruitment technology. I also know that there are inclusive language technology. There's one called from Develop Diverse, which helps you amplify inclusive communication in your job ads, for example. But you also have to be aware of algorithm bias, because who made that tech? If it's all the same type of people who made the tech, it's more than likely that it's also biased. There was a situation where like with the Apple phone, where every Asian, or I think like East Asian person could open each other's phone, and that is not safe. If you think about the seat belts, where for the longest time it was modeled after men. So because of course women don't drive, right? So if a woman is in the driver's seat and has an accident, that seat belt was not designed to protect them. So just things to keep in mind in terms of like who's in the room when those design and products have been made. Set metrics to measure your hiring process. I'm a big believer in what gets measured gets done. So how are you tracking the progress, the type of job candidates that are attracted to your ads, number of diverse people you actually invite in to interview, the types of candidates you hire, and what is the retention rates? Because now in this day and time, people really, what's it called? People demand a lot more from their employers, than in previous decades, for example. All right, so next tip, I'm going to try to move quickly through this. It is very common that we ask ourselves, how inclusive are we? So when you start from asking yourself, how inclusive am I in my life, in my workplace, then you're already thinking about all the good things that you do. And my challenge to y'all for 2023 is to start by asking, how exclusive am I? Because then you start from looking at what don't I do right? Who don't I include? Who do I exclude? Right? Because of course, there are many things you do that are inclusive. But if you start from like, okay, what can I fix? What can I improve? It goes a long way in assessing how do you communicate in your family, in your friend groups, in your workplace? Who is in your friend groups? Who gets invited? And one of the things I do quite often, like I'm really quite specific about, like, when I have big dinners, like around like Thanksgiving or birthdays, I literally think like, who's around my table? Who did I invite? Who's not here? And of course, I can't invite everybody, but I'm just thinking from my friends group, are we all similar? Are we different? Is there a predominance of one group over the other? So I think about things like that. I think about it in terms of like the people we work with, the consultants we bring on, the people who facilitate sessions for us. How diverse are they? To the speakers we invite to join some of this session, how diverse are they? What different perspectives are they bringing in? And are we pushing the button enough? And when in doubt, for those of you who know me, I always ask, is everyone in the room, right? It's when in doubt, just look around and go like, is everybody who should be here, right? I think that oftentimes we, fight and do the hustle in the workplace to be more diverse and more inclusive. But what about in your personal life? How many of your friends are different from you? How many of them come from a different culture? How many of them come from a different religion? Because you can't just say like, at work, I want to be inclusive, but at home, all my friends look exactly like me, have the same values. I mean, of course, we should have similar values, but, just have the same outlook in the world. Okay. The next thing I'm talking about are microformations and micro advantage practice. If you've heard from us in the past couple of sessions, we talk a lot about microformations, but we talk about it very quickly and we don't go a little bit more in depth into it. So that's what I'm going to try to do today quickly. All right, so microformations were developed by Mary Lowe in 1970. They're small acknowledgement of another person's value. It's a subtle act of inclusion and kindness that goes a long way in building a culture of belonging. So, an affirmation is a statement asserting existence or truth in a way that affirms a person. So we talk about affirming words. We talk about agency. If somebody says, call me this, do so. Right? Don't argue with them about whether or not they should be called this. If somebody tells you their name is, I don't know, Chisom maybe, they'll say like, oh, can I call you Zoe? For example, right? So you can affirm somebody's identity. You can recognize and validate their experience and expertise. You can build their confidence. You can develop trust with them. You can foster belonging and support someone as well in their career. So benefits of micro affirmations, it actually helps reduce unconscious bias. The practice of affirming the achievements of others is important for reducing how we think of unconscious or how we perpetuate unconscious bias. Because if you're always looking for the positives in somebody, then you have less time to think about that funny joke about Mexican people that may not be delivered or received well, right? So slowly, just by affirming, like, say, oh, really nice shirt, or like, really great sweater. Thank you for that speech today. Oh, really great work with that presentation. If that is a conscious thing that you do over time, it becomes like habits and it also becomes a culture. Microaffirmations help mitigate or lessen damage. Say if you have affinity groups are like employee resource groups. They also help with mentoring programs. They can mitigate damage caused by unconscious bias. So if somebody, for example, imagine, say, walks into an office and somebody asks them like, what are you doing here? Are you the cleaner? And then the next person that sees you goes, hey, really great to see you. Like it's not a replacement, but at least it's a counter effect where you're also acknowledged in some sense, and maybe create a safe space where you could process what has previously happened to you. Microaffirmations also just meets a core emotional needs. As people, we need to be affirmed in some sense. Even if we're like, oh, I'm tough, I don't need anybody, just to be seen and recognized by the people you care about goes a long way. And it could also motivate us and make us productive. Like, imagine if you're doing your best and you have like a manager who's just like, this sucks, that sucks, everything sucks. You're just like, Why should I even bother? Everything sucks anyway, you know? But I think in general, like as people, we need to be seen and heard. And being seen and heard is a microaffirmation. And this is just like a fundamental basic need. Microaffirmations evokes reciprocity. So if you come into a workplace or a friend groups where, you know, I'm just like, oh, Eva, nice scarf. You know, maybe like, oh, thanks. Nice hair. It might be strange at first, but eventually you get into the habit of like, okay, this is a thing we do here. We recognize things about people that we like. It also has the benefit of role modeling effects, especially like within leadership and management. You know, they're the ones, which is why every time with DEI, we often talk about the importance of leadership buy-in, because they can help push a culture forward. If the leaders you know, using microaffirmations, then it's quite easy for us to pick it up. I often think about like my child who's 3, who watches everything I do, you know, and she models like all the behavior. So far, we're still trying to get her to say thank you and please, and so she says it at will, like whenever she wants, not always when she needs to say it, but you know, I keep trying to like say it, because then I see like sometimes she's like, oh, sorry, or thank you and please, and it's really nice, I think, because she sees me doing it. Okay, microaffirmations are also good to rectify our own unconscious biases. Research suggests that behavior follows attitude. So our attitudes can be changed by behavior. So if we consciously improve our behavior, we can lessen or become more aware of our unconscious biases. Okay, so examples: asking others for their opinions, recognizing the achievements of others, using friendly facial expressions and gestures, taking a genuine professional interest in someone's personal life or professional life. So think of microaffirmations as a series of small acts of inclusion that adds up to the overall feeling of inclusion for everyone. So something to think about, we can discuss later, is if you practice it in your workplace. And now I want to go quickly over micro advantage. Micro advantage practice, they're actually very subtle and unconscious messages that motivate, inspire, and enhance workplace performances. They're the opposite of micro inequities, actually, and they are conveyed through facial expressions, gestures, tone of voice, choice of words, nuance, and syntax. And they're actually more subtle than microaffirmations, but just as important in making a person feel valued and appreciated. Okay. So what are the benefits of micro advantages? When applied effectively, micro advantages can unlock employee or human potential, enabling one's engagement, creativity, loyalty, and performance. Micro advantages are also central to effective leadership, because ideally it's without partiality. So some examples, like making eye contact with your colleagues. I also want to nuance here that depending on where you lie on the spectrum, if you're neurodiverse, for example, then maybe making eye contact is not your forte, and we also need to have grace for that. Nodding and smiling. I often struggle with the, like, you know, when we talk about microaffirmations and micro advantage, you know, to like always smile, because no, if I'm in the middle of something and I'm thinking, I'm not going to always smile. And I think there also has to be grace for that, that if I'm not smiling doesn't mean I'm not, you know, like being inclusive, but these are where nuances come in, and we have to be very mindful of them. Not crossing your arms when you speak to a colleague. That's generally like a sign of like, you know, like you're not receiving everything that you're hearing, but sometimes it's not, you know, sometimes you might be cold, you know, so nuance, context matters. Use a question, not a statement, when you have a negative reaction to a colleague's suggestion. We always say like, never assume, always ask. When in doubt, you can ask clarifying questions. This is the same thing as like active listening. So you can repeat what you think you heard and see if it's what they said, because we also use language differently. And sometimes something can come off, ill-intentioned when it wasn't intended to sound that way. And of course, handle interruptions respectfully. Some of us can talk up a storm. Sometimes we're not mindful about the other people in the room who are trying to get a word in, or sometimes we just interrupt somebody in the middle of a conversation. And sometimes it's as a bystander or as an observer, you can also like say, I want to hear what Eva has to say. Can they finish first before you continue? As long as you do things like that respectfully, I think they also matter. All right, so to close up here, microaffirmations and microadvantages are believed to enhance an individual's engagement and overall performance, be it in the workplace and in society at large. So they're important. So now we've gone over inclusive language, asking yourself how exclusive you are, and the third tip being use more microaffirmations and microadvantages in your home, your workplace. And then just a last note here. I think it's the last note. Microaffirmations and microadvantages are not a band-aid. Yeah, they aren't quick fixes. These changes have greater impact over time. It's like culture. You can't change culture in one day. So the more you do them, the more you cement them. Be authentic and genuine in practicing microaffirmations and microadvantage. Something just came to my mind for those who watch like Mean Girls, like where somebody's like, oh my gosh, your sweater is so cool, but they really don't mean it. And they mean it in a mean way. We don't want to do that either. We want to be honest and authentic in the things we actually affirm and the things we acknowledge. Okay, so before we move on to the last thing here, what is your personal microaffirmation practice? Say in your workplace or in your life, like not just in, let's just not say the workplace, like in life in general. Are there any ideas? How do you practice it? Even for yourself, because sometimes we're like the worst people to ourselves. Like, how do you affirm yourself? Sometimes I tell myself like, Chisom, you deserve this break. You deserve to watch this Christmas movie that you know exactly how it will go. Like I love watching Christmas movies. And like these cheesy Christmas movies where the plots just by seeing the name of the movie, but it's still so good. And I'm just like, I could be working, but no, I'd rather sit here and watch this because it makes me feel good. Or how will you practice microaffirmations and microadvantages in 2023? So something to think about. I want to quickly go over, Eva is going to quickly go over the diversity calendar very quickly. And then I just want to have a conversation and we can all, either join with chats or like voice. I see some questions that we have to answer. So we'll also get through them. So Eva, if you can run through this, that'd be great.
Okay, I always have a little bit of problem unmuting myself, but okay, so the fourth, the last tip, but in any ways the least, is use diversity calendar. Now, what is diversity calendar? It is a calendar that features diverse holidays and cultural events that go beyond like national holidays or dominant religions celebrations. Like, for instance, we're in Norway, so the calendar features Norwegian holidays, and the dominant religion here is Christian, so we celebrate Christian holidays. Diversity calendar includes other holidays and cultural events, and it is an important tool to celebrate diversity and foster inclusion. And here I would like to add, it is a very simple tool to celebrate diversity and inclusion, and very, very powerful, because you, by acknowledging other people's people that come from other cultures, other countries, other religions, by acknowledging their holidays and celebrating it, people feel seen, people feel valued, and not just for employees, it can be for your partners, your customers. It will definitely come a long way to have a diversity calendar. The next one, so yeah, what does diversity calendar enables you to do? You can specify important information on dates, holidays, and celebrations for your employees, partners, and customers. You can prevent reactive and performative diversity initiatives. So basically initiatives that are there on paper, that you see on the website, but nothing's happening. Because with diversity calendar, you can actually support intentional planning of celebrations of different holidays from different religions or different cultures. You can encourage self-learning and personal development of relevant diversity and inclusion topics and celebrations. By celebrating days like Day of Persons with Disabilities, Transgender Day of Visibility, Autism Acceptance Month, you can actually encourage people to learn about it, to learn about autism, to learn about more of transgender people, of their challenges, and the same thing. There is also Black Women's Equal Pay Day that can also bring up awareness of what not only women are going through, but Black women in particular. Next slide. And of course, you can promote cultural and social awareness of the diverse people at work and society. It's really great. Like in our team, each one of us comes from different country. And I have to say, I've never worked with a person from India before I worked with Sayanthani. And in November, was it November? She and her husband were celebrating Diwali festival. And I've never before heard of Diwali festival. And it was so super nice to learn about their tradition, how they are celebrating it, because we were there, we were part of it, we were part of the food. Part of the food. We tried the food, we did other traditions that is part of the celebrations, and we learned about like also how it is celebrated in different parts of India. So it was absolutely great to learn about that. And I think, I know the diversity calendar definitely promotes that. You can foster your DEIB values internally and externally, of course. And through diversity calendar and celebrating diverse holidays and culture events, you are actually taking a stand on diversity and inclusion, and you're showing that you're taking a stand, that it is important to you. Of course, with diversity calendar, you can ensure that anyone can have immediate access, whether it's at work or at home. And in the end, the next one, of course, representation is one of the essential aspects of inclusion. And diversity and inclusion calendar actually provides this representation and also brings awareness to important causes such as LGBTQ rights, disabilities in the workplace, etc. So this is actually this photo is actually an example of how diversity calendar that Diversify has looks like.
A PDF version, not the digital version, but this would be the PDF version. But yes, thank you, Eva. I think now we have come to the end of this session. But we do have some questions to go over. And I am wondering if Shantanya or somebody has kept track of the questions. I think the first question here was about the bullet points, and we're going to send the presentation to all who attended, at least registered. And then there was a question here, Eva, for you from Emma. I hope I haven't missed anyone before. It says, can you say something about the rationale? What were the elements that led you to being comfortable to include your pronouns?
Yes, so I actually decided to just learn more about it. And I know we talked about it in our team. We discussed about it. I also read and realized that pronouns is a way to affirm other people's gender. But what was kind of a revelation for me and what kind of tipped the point was that by me, because I thought, why should I use the pronouns when I present as a woman and then even putting my pronouns, she, her, like, why does it matter? But then I realized that not only when you're using somebody else's pronouns that you are supporting and validate their gender identity, basically by using my own pronouns, even if they are the same as I present, is also supporting and validating other people's choices in gender. So that was kind of a process for me. I don't know if it was clear.
Thanks, Eva. And the next question here was, when it comes to pronouns, from Isaiah, sorry if I destroyed your name. When it comes to pronouns, I was wondering, isn't it important to be consistent throughout the whole organization or company? If only few use their pronouns in their signature, for example. I'm curious what you think about that. I think that with pronouns, this is why we talk about, like, if you want to be inclusive, then ideally you should also adopt things that, we say, this is what we want to do, we want to adopt. And then if you don't feel comfortable, we can have a conversation about it. But the thing we need to remember about pronouns is sometimes people are not out. So for people who don't fit within the binary, or people who are not like heterosexual, they are not out with, say, their gender identity or their sexuality. If we force people or to disclose, we risk outing them, and we can't do that. So it still needs to be optional as a way to protect people who might not feel ready or safe to disclose their gender identity. Nonetheless, if you have a high rate of adoption, it could eventually make them feel like, okay, this feels like a safe space where I could disclose and I won't be judged. Especially, I think it's quite important as well that people who identify along the heteronormative cisgendered adopt, because we take for granted that everyone who presents as a woman is a woman, or everyone who presents as a woman is not maybe anything else within the full gender spectrum. So it's important to be mindful as well that we can encourage, but we can't force people, just to protect those who are not ready to disclose.
Can I just also add, I think it's also, by not forcing people to use it, you are also preventing performativeness, because if somebody is forced to do it, they will do it, but they will not care, they will not learn about it, and it will be just just on paper, basically, or in the email. So that, for instance, that was important for us and for me when Chisom asked us to use the pronouns. So I think we added it to our emails in different times.
Yeah, yes. And I think something else that is worth saying is, like, sometimes, and I think about this a lot and I go in and out, sometimes having it there, even though you're not actively engaged in the fights and the march towards like inclusive pronouns, makes somebody else who receives your email or who sees your profile aware that, okay, we're not just he and she, you know. I think it also raises some level of awareness nonetheless. So but I think, like, I recall when I asked everyone to I encouraged everyone to include their pronouns. I was also very mindful of the people who didn't. So I would check in from time to time. Like 2 weeks ago, like, hey, I see you haven't included your pronouns. Is there something you want to talk about? Is it difficult? Or so have a conversation as well. And everyone has to go in their own time. But I think as long as we continue to engage, I think maybe if I'd not raised it a few times, we would not have had that conversation. And maybe if I would never feel comfortable doing it. But I had to ask and follow up a few times, like, what are you feeling? And why is this hard to go through it? Okay. Do we have any other questions here? I see something here from...
There's a question for you, Chisom.
Yeah.
I think it was from Emma from the beginning, you know, when you were doing the numbers of like, why is DEIB important?
Yes.
She asked, what is the source of these numbers?
So I think that is from the McKinsey reports, the very famous McKinsey reports of the importance of DEIB. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I guess that's it, right?
That's it regarding the questions. Does anyone
I think we've covered all the questions.
Yeah.
Any more questions or something to say or comment? I know there were many comments.
Comments, inputs, feedbacks. No?
Yes.
Yeah, Esia or Isaiah?
Hello, it's Asia, but thank you for trying. I just want to thank you. Start by thanking you for all the wonderful webinars I've been a part of this year, and I'm looking forward to more next year. And it was interesting to hear your answer about the pronouns, because that is an important point that you actually have to talk about it. But I was thinking about the consistency towards audience or whoever, if you have a company where you have a lot of different collaborators. But then I realized while we were talking that then it's important to be transparent about these things, that if we are more open on your website maybe, and saying that raising these things, then if you are, for example, an audience or a client, then you won't wonder, like, okay, why aren't all of them maybe putting their pronouns in their signature? So that's a good point of also internally, you as a leader talking to everyone and raising it up. So I just wanted to say that, but thank you so much for today.
Thanks for sharing. Thank you.
I see Emma asked a question about how to access our diversity calendar.
Yes, you can order. Emma, you can reach out to us. We can write you. Yeah, you can also order on our website. There was a question here. How do you make sure the majority starts caring about diversity? Isn't that the question? I think through dialogue and through conversation. And I think within the context, like, who's the majority? And I think as well, oftentimes, say, for example, middle-aged white men tend to feel attacked because they get a lot of, like, you're the reason for everything wrong in the world. And that's not true, And I think, like, if we're able to have a conversation where we remove the shame and the finger pointing and the blame, and understand that when we talk about DEI, we're talking about it from a systemic and structural perspective. Yes, it translates oftentimes into interpersonal experiences, but if we can meet eye to eye, so to say, we can have conversations and listen to each other, listen to understand, not to respond. And I think that is how we start to get the majority to care. And it also comes down to what, if we're talking about it within a workplace perspective, that leadership buy-in is very important. And you are right, Joanna, when you talk about diversity-related events are mostly attended by those who experience the lack of diversity and inclusion. I will say that that is how it starts, but in my experience, over time, even people who fit within this majority also attend because they also want to be allies. They want to help create workplaces that are inclusive. It's not where it needs to be, but we're definitely heading in that direction. At least this is my hopes. I think as long as we continue to talk and not blame each other and, do so respectfully and with understanding, we're getting places.
I want to comment and give feedback.
All right, Alina.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you. It was an amazing walkthrough. I liked very much that it was not just don't do this, don't do that, but it was a lot of mindsetting and what and how to be comfortable with doing that. And I really like this part with role modeling. So we have to talk to our children, be the role model for them, and for the next generation, it will be a much better and simpler way of just doing it without, it's like, I like also another part with this unconscious thing. Like we actually do it unconsciously because we learned it from previous role modeling and from the movies and from everything. So our work to be conscious about these things and make it unconscious, the right way of interacting with people, unconsciously good for the next generation. So thank you very much. It was a lot of learning. It's nice to recognize I do some of the good things, and I really, it's important to realize that probably I'm not. So I have a lot of things making notes to myself. So just assessing myself and everything. It's a good exercise. Thank you very much. I love the session.
Thanks, Alina. I think it's also worth saying that, like doing DEI work takes work. It's easy to say like, oh, it's I often hear like, oh, it's a lot, it's exhausting, it's draining, and it's not easy. It's just that process of learning, unlearning, relearning, unpacking, but that's the work. And I think once we're willing to show up every day and engage in some sense and learn something new, it goes a long way. There's a question here from Achi. Do you see the conversation about intersectionality progressing? I mean, at policy level? It depends on which context, and it depends on which country we're talking about. I think like in a lot of Nordic countries, for example, intersectionality, just like equity, is still like new and being understood. But when we break it down, like when we remove it from like the fancy word intersectionality and we break it down into like the different identities that we hold and carry, I see more discourse happening, but it's far away from where it needs to be. But if we're talking about intersectionality from like, say, a US or like a UK perspective, it's a bit more, like it's a lot more advanced, like relative to, say, the Nordics. So it is our responsibility to continue to bring in that intersectional and equity lens in the work that we do, because it is also human nature to just think, okay, let's talk about issues facing women, because we're like, okay, we're here to advance gender equality, without really thinking that there are some women, or a lot of women, who do not have the same opportunities. Like the term, like when we say something about, there's this thing Sheryl Sandberg made popular, lean in. For some women, lean-in is possible. For other women, for a lot of women, lean-in is not very possible, you know? So it's just thinking about what is the context that we're addressing. Okay, let's see, just comments. Thank you all for the great feedback. And I think Shantani had dropped the link in the chat for next year's session with Dr. Purnima and Astrid and myself. It's going to be a super session. Dr. Purnima is a brilliant DEI expert, as is Astrid. So it should be a really great conversation. And we're looking at the mistakes to avoid in 2023. So I hope you'll join us. It's usually at the end or towards the end of the month, like the last Wednesday, I think, in a month. But yeah, I really also want to say thank you for being here. I really do appreciate that you'll take the time every month to be with us and to engage with us and to put up with sometimes my bad jokes. So I'm learning to be funnier for 2023, so we'll see how that goes.